Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. Welcome to Marvel Movie Talk right here. Oh, wait. Sorry. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Marvel Movie Talk. Facebook got in the way. Facebook was like, we don't want to stream your content right now. And I'm like, it's fine. I don't want it. And I had to close it off. But in any case, welcome to everyone to a very special Marvel Movie Talk. I am Christian Bladt of the Blattcast and excited to be joined by Adam Schomer. Adam, thank you for being here and taking the time to chat with me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Happy to be here. We're live, right? I love this.
We are now, yeah, but not on Facebook apparently. So.
Apparently, that live is the way to go. That's very,
yeah.
very.
We're on YouTube, and I should have known to just click off that Facebook icon before we started, but it was being very persistent. So Adam is here today because he has made a documentary series, which is now available on demand. And if you're a subscriber here on Geekscape, you've probably heard this referenced over the last year plus. But Selling Superman, I could explain it, but then I realized you'd probably do a much better job explaining it and let people know the idea and how it even comes on your radar.
Yeah. So first of all, it's a documentary. This is real life, right? It turned into 4 parts, but this is a 40-year family secret comic book collection. Literally, they couldn't tell anyone. The kids couldn't tell anyone, and it ended up being a source of trauma, a source of pain. But within this pain, this unboxing of family stories is a 300,000 comic book collection and a Superman #1. At 7.0, valued at probably $3.5 million. Who knows? You don't know until you really sell it. And gosh, what turned out to be something I thought was centered around value and how much things are going for. How do we get to this point? What do we value in life? Started unraveling to this insane family portrait, with all the relatives and all the effects his father had on people, and really the effect it's having on my friend Darren now. Yeah.
Yeah, so Darren is at the center of this story. So you knew him prior to this, did you get to know him because you heard about the collection?
No, we went to high school together. Okay. And he's a couple years younger, so we played soccer together. So we weren't like hangout buddies, but when you play sports together, you bond. And then some years later, we're back in touch for tech stuff. And then one day he called and said, by the way, this is what happened a year ago. My dad passed away, and we moved all his comic books, and we might be able to start talking about it now. Do you think this is something that would be cool? So I grabbed my camera and ran back to Michigan, where we're from, and over Thanksgiving, filmed them, him and his mom and his brother in the old house before it sold, right? So we could see the old house and where everything was. That becomes really a lot of episode 1 was me alone with them in this very verite, intimate access style, which I love. I really love it.
Yeah, so Darren's father had this collection, and I guess the way that it unfolds is they knew he had a bunch of comics and these boxes, but they didn't know what was in it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not like they got to crack open one of those boxes and see what's inside, right?
No, they didn't. He didn't share any of it with Darren, which, as you know, as a comic book collector and just a fandom, it's fun to hang with people and talk about things, right? It's fun to share it. And his dad wouldn't do any of that. I mean, he had it kind of with his own buddies at the comic book store, but not with his son. And yeah, they just, the family didn't really know what was in there, nor did Brian, the best bud. Brian's a kind of a fan favorite, Darren's best bud, who was a comic book fanatic. They all wondered what's under the sheets, what's in the boxes. There's a whole closet that started before Darren was even born, so that's late 60s, early 70s he had started. And it was accumulating over years and years, 30, 40 years, right? 40-year family secret. They did know he had a Superman 1. They didn't know in what condition. His father never graded anything. Again, for people that know, that's kind of strange to not grade anything when you're at that level. Batman 1,
Yeah, especially
Superman
when you
one,
have those
Spider-Man
books,
one.
you know. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that all was really, I think, for them being able to even first take it down to CGC and grade some of these, that's a very big moment, especially with the Superman one, to be like, what grade is this?
Well, and I think
And
the important thing to talk about with the Superman one is there are very few copies of that book in a high grade, and 7 would be considered a high grade. So there's like a 7,
yeah,
a couple of 8s, I think you say in there, but it's also, it's like one of those things, you know, like it's almost like how the U.S. Mint knows where the high dollar amount, you know, bills are at all times. It's like, well, they know where they are. They know who has them. Sometimes it's like, okay, anonymous buyer. At one point, I believe Nicolas Cage owned a Superman #1, and I think we found out he had it after he sold it. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but
I don't know either. It's possible. Yeah, a lot of people are hush hush about.
yeah.
I mean, it all goes on the census once it's graded. It goes on the census, like you're saying, so you know, but you don't know who owns it. And at the time of filming, there was 2 8.0s and 2 7.0s. One of the 8.0s then regraded at an 8.5. We just didn't want to get into how that could even happen, but it does happen. So yeah, that's where we're at now.
Yeah, it's interesting with the grades. So because I use this fancy green screen, it can be hard to show. I have one slabbed book by CGC, and it is Secret Wars #8, the first appearance of Spider-Man in the black suit, and I have it slabbed at a 9.2. It's a copy that I bought as a child and didn't have bagged or boarded, but I did this so that I could get a triple signed by the writer, the penciler, and the inker. So that's why I have it. But as soon as it goes in this, and as Brian, who is Darren's buddy, talks about, he hates slab books because what I can't do with this, sit down and show it to my kid. You know, I can't do anything with it other than, you know, maybe put it on a wall or have it on a shelf. Now, if it was Superman 1, I think I would want it in this kind of a thing. But I don't have any books that are anywhere near that kind of valuable, you know.
Most people don't, because it's so expensive. And I came in not in the comic book world and became a little. First of all, I still was amazed every time. He's like, "Yeah, that's $1,000. That's $5,000. That's a Star Wars one, $1,000. We have 100 of them." You know, things like that. But then after a while, I was desensitized. So now someone says a $250 book, I'm like, oh, cool. But that's still a lot of money for a comic book that you can read. Yeah. You know, you can buy a reprint, right? You can buy a reprint.
Especially when you consider the fact that, you know, a lot of these books, you know, like this one that I held up cost 75 cents, but, you know, the oldest books are like 10 cents. I mean, the oldest Marvel books, you know, and so it's the idea. And Yoda Whirl is in the chat. Thank you for being there. It stops being a consumer good and starts being an investment. And yeah, that's sort of, you know, so the age that I'm buying and collecting comic books, and sort of one of the things that turned me off is the early 90s, there was this rampant speculation. So there's a new X-Men #1 that comes out in 1991. And I think it's sold for like, I don't know, $3. It's worth like $10 now because people bought so many copies of it back then that it's like, well, yeah, it's not, you're missing the point. Like, it's great you have all those. But Darren's dad had, as you referenced, like 50 Star Wars #1s. And there's a, you know, you talk to somebody
50
at
Ghost
a shop.
Rider ones.
Yeah. You talk to somebody at a comic shop he used to go to, and that at some point they came across a box of giant size X-Men, which is the first appearance of the new X-Men. And they didn't give him the box, but they were like, well, we can give you some. And that's the most fascinating thing in terms of the collection. Seeing it on screen during the course of the 4 episodes is the stacks of Black Panther 1. And no, they're not bagged and boarded, but they've also been preserved. So like, oh, they look like, I mean, maybe they're not 9s, but they're probably all like 8.5s. You know, we used to use a scale of mint, near mint, very fine, and all that. And they all look like mint copies, and there's just these huge stacks. So at what point in the process of Darren starting to go through the collection do you come on board? You know, had he like gone through it significantly before then, or how early were you in?
Yeah, about a year after his father's passing. Like the timeline would be August 2020, his father passes. I come in November 2021. So Darren, at that point, as people will see in episode 1, at that point, he's built the fortress, his fortress of solitude, which
Right.
turns out to be 3 shipping containers, 40 feet by 8 feet each, with these just lined with comic books. But in no way when I came in were they organized at all. And his father didn't really keep it organized. Had Darren pulled out the major keys, yeah, and he had those graded already. So we were already at that point where he knew he had the Superman one, right? He knew he had the Batman one, Amazing Spider-Man, the X-Men, some of the X-Men's. But they were finding stuff as we were filming that first time. I mean, you see him come across a Silver Surfer they didn't know they had. And they just kept finding and finding, even through the end of filming, which would be at least 2 years later. So at May of 23, no, May. I mean, we were even May of 2023. We shot all the way through the end of 23 because little things keep happening throughout. But so it is a treasure hunt that we get to witness. We get to witness Darren's kind of family and collection changing, also the way they're dealing with the books, how they're working with different people and starting to grow and manage it and start to organize. Because as Darren's saying there, as you're watching, that's an $80,000 box, and that just blew me away. That's a car, an expensive car, but it was incredibly disorganized. And there's a part in episode 4 where like they were missing, I think, 20 Spawn #1s, probably $20,000, and people don't just lose 20 grand unless you're in the Bitcoin market, or you're winning 20 grand. But,
or you're at the roulette wheel. But I know what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah. And so as Darren's saying, like, he doesn't think people stole it, but it's like, where is it? And where'd they put it? And they're not sure. And a lot of it's memory. So it's fun because, Brian, as you were saying, loves raw books, and Brian's just, a lot full of antics and having a great time. Yeah. There's the Silver Surfer that we're seeing right there. But these guys are, they're doing it for the love of it. Adam Keller they bring in is just a total fan of, comic books 12 hours a day. And that's what he does for Darren,
Yeah, and obviously, there's definitely plenty of talk about Darren's dad and sort of, how he was difficult and the this stuff, but not really with a plan to do anything with it, And,
No plan.
It's interesting because at some point it's sort of mentioned as an aside. He doesn't just have Superman 1; he has like Superman 1 through like 500 something. Like, he has like the entire run of the series.
468, I think. Yeah, the whole run. He had the whole run. Right. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy to just think about, having that, and it's
so in that case, he is actually, because in some way he's hoarding, right? He's obsessively just grabbing one. And then there's this other part that's, I love Superman, and he actually collects and gets a run and gets Superman #1. But a lot of it is kind of haphazard, knowing like, I think that's going to be worth something, so I'll buy a bunch. And a lot of collectors don't really do that. They might get a run of stuff or things they like, but multiples, 100 of a book, 10, 20 of a book. The X-Men thing, like you said in episode 4, Darren didn't know any of that until we went and found some of the old guys he used to hang out with at the comic book store, and they told him how he got that many copies. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And, look, I mean, obviously most people start building a collection like this the way I did. I was 7 years old. So if I did buy a book that ended up being valuable, like the first appearance of Spider-Man's black costume, I certainly didn't buy 2, let alone 20. I didn't have the money, where was I going to? And if like, it took my mom forever to realize that 3 Spider-Man books came out a month, because she would be mad when I came home with another one. It's like, you just bought one. I'm like, this is different. Look, So I wasn't walking into the door with a stack of the same book ever, So I think that it's interesting to sort of hear that approach to just getting so much of it. And the series Selling Superman, the documentary, and people can find it on demand wherever they might choose, like Apple, Amazon, anywhere like that, right? Wherever.
Apple, Amazon, Google Play people use, and YouTube. You can buy it. You can buy the series right now and check it out. Just released, just came out yesterday.
Yeah, so that's why I'm glad to get the chance to talk to you this week when it's out there and people can discover it. And our friend Jonathan London from Geekscape spoke with you some time ago about it, and he actually shows up in the documentary. So there's a
He's
lot of
great.
interviews that happen, and he was like, he mentioned this as an idea to me before I think he'd ever even done the episode. So he knew that this is something I was excited about. Look, I was always way more of a Marvel guy, not much of a DC fan, but at the same time, the idea that here's a collection with Superman 1 and Batman 1, and yes, all this other stuff. So personally, I'm excited about the stack, the idea of a box of giant size X-Men #1, whatever. But just sort of going through it, and the idea that Darren's dad, wasn't going to do anything with it. I think that early on, Darren says he likes the idea of these books going to people who are going to appreciate them. And this is not necessarily the huge ticket ones, but this is more like we're talking about 30 copies of Black Panther #1. It would be great if 30 people who love that character get to read that book and actually get it. Somebody in the book at one point, I think it's a guy who works for CGC, like smells the pages, which might seem weird to somebody who's not a collector, but books from the 70s smell a lot different than books from the 40s, so
not just someone from CGC. That's Matt Nelson, president of CGC. Right. And it amazed us that he's not wearing gloves. He just was holding that book and smelling that book, and that kind of blew me away too. It's like no, we find that wearing gloves would actually be more apt to tear something. So we got some of those hard hitters that have been in there for a while. Some of the guys from Heritage. Now Darren, wants, like you said, to get the books in the right hands, right, and actually share them and have fun with his buddies, and people read them together. And he loves when someone's a veteran and said, "Yeah, I kept a Captain America with me all through the Iraq War, this, and I would love a copy." He loves those stories. He loves connecting with people. And of course, he's still selling the books to people. He's not just giving it all away. There's so much expense that goes into having a collection, as with CGC and all this stuff. But he, even some of the bigger books, in talking to him now, and no spoilers of what's happened with some of the bigger books, but he wants those to go in the right hands too. I think he's shying a little bit away from some of the big ones of doing auction, because with an auction, you don't know who's going to get it. And he really would like there to be a personal touch to who's going to own XYZ book. Yeah.
Right. Because you can, use an auction service. You mentioned Heritage. You can go through the effort of putting them up on eBay. You could do a Whatnot, sort of the live stream way that they sell comics now. You could do all of that, and you could sell it for what's the most that money that I can get for every single one of these books. Or it's like, we're going to get a good amount of money, but it's going to be from somebody locally, here in Michigan. And I wanted you to take a moment to talk about when Darren makes a decision of like, let's start doing something with these books. There's a couple of, I wouldn't say that they're really on different ends of the spectrum of comic sales, but they're both at different levels. And so there's the guy who operates by himself. There's the father-son team. Talk a little bit about that process, which we see in the film, sort of deciding like who do we want to try to partner with.
Yeah, that's the impetus of episode 2, where he's finally coming out, and as he says in the car on the way to Comic-Con Motor City, my father would be rolling over in his grave if he knew what we were about to do, to work with anyone. So it's a cool process where he talks to a lot of dealers and starts telling them and hearing who would want to buy what they'd want to buy, how they deal with it. They want to buy the whole collection. Do they want to partner? And definitely one of the great stories is the Hatchback Kid, kind of an underdog. And Darren takes a lot of the underdogs under his wing. And smaller kids had a lot of kidney problems since he was a kid. And just really self-starter. And Darren takes him under his wing. And then there's an interesting connection with the Hatchback Kid and his dad, because they work together. And I think that becomes really special for Darren to see a father-son actually as a duo, selling books together. And it meant a lot to bring him into the actual collection, to bring those guys in to see it.
It's
some of the
something
first
that
people that
you
saw it.
were. It's something that you
Yeah,
were saying earlier. The idea that Darren's dad didn't share it with him, and it's like
yeah.
it's almost like, what are you saving this stuff for if it's not to share? Like sitting down. My son's 9, sitting down and going through boxes of like my old Star Wars figures is just like it's exciting. Also, none of them are in resale shape, so I don't have to worry about it. They're the
Nice.
toys that I played with when I was younger than him. So that helps a little bit. You know what I mean? It's not like he doesn't want to read my Uncanny X-Men 137 because then that's like, well, why don't you just look it up on Kindle? It's a little bit easier to do that now. And yeah, I love the dynamic from those two, the hatchback,
Yeah.
the kid and his dad. And in our live chat, Cam Egan checking in from the greater Chicagoland area. This
Nice,
movie looks
Chicago.
really interesting and I can't wait to see it. So I highly recommend it. And it was one of those like, okay, I'll probably need a couple days to watch. And it's not because the episodes are short. I was just like, oh, I kind of need to see where this goes next. So we'll kind of get back into the selling the collection part of it. But it ended up being 4 episodes. Was the goal to do it as a film? And then you're just like, oh, there's too much in here.
Absolutely. Yeah. 90-minute feature. If anything, I was thinking, oh, I was interviewing people along the way for their little stories of comic books that weren't related to Darren. Just like I interviewed my father, what was his relationship to comic books, and when his father took them and threw them away while he's at college. And Phil, who ends up in episode 4, Phil talking about his daughter with cancer and how the Spider-Man meant so much to her. I had these little Harry Met Sally kind of snippets that I was thinking I would put throughout the 90-minute feature, and then we start editing, and of course shooting. We had so much, and I had edited what became the first episode. I'm like, that's 45 minutes, and I'm not even close. I'm just laying the groundwork. So it became really obvious to me this needed more time. It needed 4 episodes at least. I probably could have gone more. Probably could have gone 5, especially if we kept filming. But you have to say, there's budgets and you got to call quits. But I think it really lends itself well to 4 episodes because the first 3 have that 45-minute, natural arc. Like the things were just really laying out for me without trying too hard. So there was just these natural breaks, like where we got to at the end of episode 4, we're about to come out. Episode 1, where we're about to come out, and the end of episode 2, where I won't ruin it, but some drama from the family starts to creep back into the fun of comic book selling and all this. And then it's like, oh yeah, the past.
Yeah. And, without giving too much away, there is some concerns family wise that come up. And, I don't want to give it away, but I'm worried. I'm like, oh boy, they're like dealing with all this money. I feel like this is not going to be something that remains a fun watch, and again, not saying anything that actually happens or doesn't. It's just more that I've seen enough documentaries where when you start to plant those seeds, you start to think, it's like, if you remember the old Behind the Music on VH1, there's like before the 3rd commercial is, but it all was about to end. And then they come back and you're like, oh my God, the band breaks up. This one's in rehab. So I'm glad that the family was able to navigate it because I probably, like a lot of people, I think about my own family. If something like this was dropped in my family's lap, no one would be happy with probably any of the decision making. That goes on.
That's one thing that I think was, how do I say it? Darren is the sole executor. There was no will. First of all, you talk about his father having wishes or what he's going to do with these. He had no will. He had no wishes about the comic books. If anything, he wanted to just be shot into outer space, into a UFO with his books. Like literally said that, somewhat joking, but I want to die with these books. I want to take them with me. So difficult in that respect, but his mom had already divorced and wanted nothing to do with the comic books. So this, there's been some internet trolls, and there still are, that keep hauling off at Darren and his mom as being greedy. It's like she left the guy because it was so hard to live with him and didn't want anything to do with the books. And like how you can call someone like that greedy or blah, 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 like is so weird to me, but she's so integral. And so it left Darren, and Darren's brother has some special needs. So Darren's really the sole executor of this estate, if you will. So in a good way, he didn't have to battle somebody for what you do. But then, like we're saying, no matter how he deals with it, people aren't exactly necessarily happy. Like, oh, you could be spending more time with your brother. Why aren't you including him more? Or why aren't you doing X, Y, Z? Why are you selling so much? Or why are you even spending so much time with the comics like your dad did? Why don't you just get rid of them? I mean, if it was me, Christian, I would have sold them in 10 seconds,
Right.
Because I say, okay, the value of it, and I can put that towards something else I really value. I'd like to start a little village of houses with my friends in nature area, and that would be really valuable to me. But Darren really felt connected to, I think, not only his father's past, but these heroes. Darren loved Superman also. His dad loved Superman. Darren loved Superman, and he felt really like he should do the right thing. And that's however much it comes through. Like, that's just Darren too. He wants to do things right. He really likes to understand a topic, get to know it. So he wouldn't be the kind of guy that's like, yeah, I'm just going to sell it and take $10 million and walk away. Like, no, I want to get to know it. I don't want to leave money on the table, and I want to do it right. And I want to get it to the right hands. And I want to understand this comic book world. Probably, I think, because he also wanted to understand his father, and he didn't.
Yeah.
He didn't.
No, and I think that, that's the part that looms over it. There's very short archival footage where we see his dad a little bit, but obviously he's not involved in the process of the filmmaking. But I think it's helpful to at least give you a sense of the presence. I believe he's yelling at Darren. It's sort of reminiscent of anybody who is ever was a fan of the Howard Stern show. He used to play these clips of his dad yelling at him. I told you not to be an idiot, you moron. Yeah. So it's from when he was a little kid, so it's like, okay, and look, there's moments I think where everybody can kind of relate to that dynamic, no matter what your parents were like, they all have moments like that. And unfortunately, as a parent, you realize sometimes those are the moments that stick with them more than but what about your birthday party at the beach? Wasn't that great? Yeah, but you said this mean thing that one time. All right.
Right.
So,
but that's true. And I think in Darren's case, it was repetitively not getting praise. It really was.
Yeah.
And never really hearing the words, I love you. He told me so many stories that couldn't go in the film of a wrestling match where he did so well as a young kid, and the father being like, why didn't you win? You got second place in the state. Why didn't you win? Instead of like, wow, congratulations. That stuff to me was actually really heartbreaking. Like,
oh yeah.
I played athletics, and I look back, I go, oh, my parents were incredibly supportive. Or even my uncle. I remember trying out for like the state team, for soccer, to be on the Michigan Olympic development. And I had to play up a year because they didn't have it yet. And okay, I got cut. And he's like, man, well, that's great. Like, you even tried out for a year up, and like, okay, it meant something, right? And to not have any of that would have been so difficult. So I really do empathize a lot with the insane amount of conditioning that we're all kind of given from our parents. Darren's not alone like that. Not alone at all.
And sort of like, his dad's gone, and this isn't the legacy he intended to leave, but he has his collection, and Darren's sort of going through it. And we're talking about him being able to share it. And obviously there's you described the hatchback kid. He has liver problem, kidney problem. Sorry, and
kidney problems. Yes.
Darren gives him an amazing gift after one of his kidney surgeries, it's a very light spoiler. It's Incredible Hulk 181, the first appearance of Wolverine. Somebody hands me that, I'll be like, all right, that person really kind of gets who I am. So I think that 10 years earlier, he wouldn't know anything about an issue of the Incredible Hulk, that has Wolverine on the cover of it. And so
correct.
One of the more interesting things as this goes along, sort of, dealing with people who are out there selling the books and is starting to acquire some books that they didn't have before, right? Which almost seems sort of counterintuitive, but we're lightly talking about, urges people get and sort of gambling and investing. It's hard to not get caught up in that stuff, to just be like, oh, I kind of want one of those too, or maybe 10 of those,
Yeah, I would. I mean, it would happen to any of us if you start to get to know a genre or a hobby. You would start to normally lean towards some part of it and want to be part of it, especially if you're spending that much time. You want to be able to talk to people about stuff. And I'm a Green Lantern fan, not because I know everything about Green Lantern. I just kind of love this idea of the green color and him being able to manifest anything he thinks of. And I just resonated with him as a kid. So Darren gave me a Green Lantern book. I'm not going to slap that thing. That means something. It's cool to have. I'll read the story now and then. But yeah, Darren full on gets pulled into this community. Full on. I mean, he's buying and selling and creating his own personal collection. And as he says in there, like his wife asks him the same question that I ask. I'm like, why are you buying? And he said, like, how is this possible? You have 300,000 comic books. Why are you taking more? And he justifies these, like, I'm using money from the collection, from what I'm selling, to go buy some other ones that I would really like or fill some holes. And it does make sense. It actually does make sense.
Well, yeah, especially
enough.
if for whatever reason his dad is missing a couple of issues from like 1981. It's probably worth like, well, I'll have all of them. And by the way, if you're a fan of Green Lantern, next time you're in Burbank, make sure you check out the new Green Lantern statue. This is the Jon Stewart iteration, but it just went up within the last month or so. We've had a Batman statue by the AMC movie theater for a while, and this isn't too far from there.
That's a good one. Nice. Thanks for that. You just pulled that up. Wow. I'll check that out.
It's almost like I do this for a living. So you made me think to like, let me find that picture.
And I am in LA, so that's good. I'm not too far from Burbank. I'm on the west side, but Burbank
might take you a couple hours to get here, but if you time it right, maybe.
Oh yeah, I know when to go. 10 a.m. against traffic. Actually, in the morning, no problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's, there's so much that starts to happen with some of the more valuable things before we get to the big tier. And there is the conversation on film multiple times, just the idea of we have these two books. We have Batman 1, we have Superman 1. And what do we do with them? And I think you can see as the process goes along, just how much Darren struggles with that, what to do with it, with both.
Absolutely. More than I could capture, I think. More than I could capture. People think we dramatize things in nonfiction and documentaries to make it more interesting. I could not show the internal, turmoil, I think, and the internal struggle that he was going. I couldn't do it justice. I can imagine he had so many sleepless nights, and we talk a little bit about how he has trouble sleeping and some stress and anxiety and things, and overthinking, right? Perfectionism and all that. But I know it's such a huge, huge decision, not only just like the Superman, but the Batman. And there's this fun Batman versus Superman that goes throughout because Brian, his best buddy, loves Batman and Darren loves Superman. And that's where that whole idea of the fake reality show that I slipped in there came from. I said, I got to see you guys just have a total geek out battle about this. And I know I'm going to just filming it in this crazy reality way, like behind the trees and confessional cams and people going at each other, just to show how ridiculous our media is. But at the same time, to show how really into it and how fun it can be to battle, to have these superhero battle wars, we called it.
Yeah, no, the presentation of that was funny because definitely, I don't know. It feels like maybe like a Storage Wars kind of show, it's all the quick cuts and I don't know about this and I don't know about that. And it's like, obviously no one's actually, is invested in it, but everything they're talking about, I'm like, it's like, well, I'm following this. And
exactly.
I would jump in if I was there right now. I would have an opinion as to why I like Spider-Man more than both of them, but that's just me.
So the framework, I get to make a point. I get to make a point in the framework of the whole thing about reality TV, but they're still exactly making these valid points about Batman and Superman, which I wanted to somehow do, and that was the only way I could frame it in a fun way because it had to be fast. I didn't want to do this long drawn out. What's Batman versus Superman and real interviews? I didn't want to do that.
No, I mean, DC spent $1 billion trying to give us Batman versus Superman, and some would say to mixed results. Cam Egan chimes in again. If I had a number one of Superman or Batman, I wouldn't know what to do either because of how valuable they are. Yeah, I think you start to figure out decisions you can make. You can, put put your kids through college and get that vacation home and pay off that, there's all those real decisions to make. But once it's gone, and I think if Darren's father's collection was only those 2 books, it's a little different, because it's like, well, I'm generating some decent money for the family and sharing the books, where you don't necessarily have to deal with that, and how much of it, we see it in the show. How real are the concerns, and for how long are there, that, oh, are we doing this too quickly? Are we really, handing stacks and boxes to these guys who are helping me sell? Does it slow down at any point? Maybe something that we don't actually see on camera in the series.
No, the concerns were very real. We get into it in episode 3 when there's that, the whole thing with the crew, which we won't get into here, spoiler alert, but it really set Darren aback, and he started realizing, people are, he's working with Harley Yee, a dealer, and the Hatchback Kid, a dealer. And sometimes, there is more like just writing down what they're taking, to go sell on consignment. And a lot of books are going out faster than he realizes, and he might not have cataloged yet, and for sure hadn't cataloged yet. And hey, is that the only copy of that book that I have? Even if it's not, only a $2,000 book, or it's absolutely was going on. He absolutely was questioning and needed to slow down the process with Harley and the Hatchback Kid. You can't cover everything, but there was definitely a pullback around that time. And then, it just goes in waves where he pulls back, reorganizes, tries to, get his head wrapped around it, kind of like we all would do just in life if we think things are getting out of control. But as he mentions too, he didn't want to become his dad. He didn't want to become a hoarder, didn't want to not let go of things. So that's in the back of his mind as he's slowing down. He's like, I don't want to become this guy that can't let go, but I feel like things are going too fast. But what do you do, Christian? Do you need to know every book of the 300,000 before you start selling? And like, how many years does that take? And do you need it totally catalog perfect before you sell anything? And I can tell you one thing that's not in the film, the series, is that there's some books that go out raw through Harley. All right, Harley, he's a Detroit dealer, but he's well known. Some raw books, not slab, that go out that they think are probably in the, let's say 9.5, 9.4, 9.6, right in that range. They think, but they're not graded yet. But Harley sells them raw for around that some other people go after buying it and comes back at a 9.8. Higher than sold for. And sometimes you're talking a $5,000 book that then sells for 20. And that really gives pause and like, oh my God, what did I do? Had I slowed down, I might have made an extra 15,000, or I just lost 15. Or sometimes I remember one of the dealers telling me, he's like, oh yeah, I sold that book for 70 and got it for 10. One of the books from the Fantastic collection. And I know that's hard to take. Then the other thing, without talking too long, is I talked to a guy that I couldn't reveal. I ended up not being able to, we interviewed him, but then he said he didn't want to be shown. But he said, that's not a bad thing, because if people get wind that there's some books in that collection that are raw, that might go for higher than they think, that's a good thing in terms of interest in the collection. And that surprised me too. It's like, oh wow, there's a potential treasure hunt for everyone there, where you can find something that not everything's graded already, not everything's totally done. There's fun in that. And that was a cool thing to recognize. I think it's still hard for Darren to see, like, oh, I might be losing 50, leaving 50 grand on the table. That's no joke. That's no joke.
Right. Yeah. No. So even if you get 200 grand for something, the fact that you could get 250 or 3 is like, oh, you still got to be careful. And, you referenced Harley. He's definitely like the businessman of all businessmen on the side of this. He, it's almost like Harvey Keitel in Pulp Fiction. He's like the wolf. He just comes in. What do you got? What do you want me to do? Okay, great. I'm going to take it off and I'm going to go sell it for you. And you're going to get a bunch of money. I love that guy. I like the Hatchback Kid and his dad too. I just was like, oh, this is great. These two very different, very different figures. And it's all just, you go to the Motor City Con. So it's all like in the Detroit area, because the collection's in Michigan. And, I think that obviously that's a part of it early on is, do we let people know where this is, because Obviously, once people are aware of a collection like this, I mean,
Yeah.
we had a local comic book shop here in Burbank, a place called House of Secrets.
Mhm.
Didn't just get broken into; it got broken into with somebody who knew what they were looking for, and they took like their most valuable books
Wow.
and smashed the front door. And I don't know how long they were there, but it wasn't long, so they knew what to take. And I mean, and that's a store. I mean, that's like
Yeah.
it's on a busy street. Even if you do it in the middle of the night, it's still like somebody could see you. If you have it stored somewhere, you really want to, you talked about it being his dad's Fortress of Solitude. You need it to be as hard to get to as the Fortress of Solitude. You don't want somebody to just be like, oh, wait, I know where that is.
Yeah, the irony of Darren's dad didn't have it in anywhere very secret is
Yeah.
the crazy thing.
It was
He
just
had
in
it in
the
his
house.
Yeah,
I'm
under a
sorry. And I'm just
sheet.
going to interject. He didn't want to go on vacation because it's like, well, I can't
Correct.
leave the house. And I mean, on the one hand, you're like, oh, that's so wild. It's sad. But also like, well, we know what this collection's worth. So yeah, I might not want to leave it behind either.
True. And the kids and the mom would be like, yeah, but nobody knows about the collection. So like no one knows to know to steal it. And if they did, they'd have to find where there's no organization again. Where are the good books?
Yeah.
It would take hours and hours and hours to get it all. So they'd be like, guys, we would know what's going on. But yeah, his dad in many ways got lucky that he stored them around. These books are in pristine condition, but it wasn't humidity controlled. And somewhere in the basement, there could have been a flood. Michigan basement where some of it's above and below, but
Yeah.
and in a closet. And he did have a safe deposit box and things like that. But then Darren took it to another level. Talk about, Fortress of Solitude. Like within one warehouse is another warehouse, which then has the shipping containers. So there's like three levels of security and three levels of weather protection and fire protection that make it very difficult to steal these things.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, he knew better than to store them in the attic, because I think that's the mistake that most people
Classic.
make, where just the extreme heat would be the real problem. By the way, Yoda Whirl has a thought. You'd have to nuclear football it, just take it with you. It's almost like, well, for the two books we're talking about, Superman 1 and Batman 1, I could almost see you have handcuffed to you this, like, one of those steel suitcases like we actually see in the film. And it's like, this comes everywhere with me, these two. And of course, that's when it's going to get stolen, is if you bring it out of the house and you carry it around. So
I was concerned, when we're on that airplane and he's holding a briefcase worth $6 million. No one on the airplane knows that. Yeah. But we know that's a $6 million thing he's carrying. Anyone runs away with that. They scored. And they scored. So yeah, even going down to Florida, his dad wouldn't go down to Florida to CGC. His dad, that's why he didn't get anything graded. It wasn't because he didn't want to know. I think he was afraid of someone getting him in the parking lot. He was afraid of CGC swapping out a worse book for the one he gave him. He just didn't trust anyone. It was obsessive. And that's probably that is the dark side of collecting, I kind of correlate it to the ring in the Lord of the Rings, where your precious becomes the thing that owns you. And in Lord of the Rings, he's got a ring for invisibility, and he lives in a dark cave, and that's the irony. Like, it doesn't even matter there. And Darren's dad has this powerful ring, the Superman 1, and all these books, and doesn't read them, and doesn't show them to anyone. It's like, well, what's the point? And Chris Vogler, who's an amazing myth expert, says, that's what you're waiting to see. Like, could it be used for good? Could it be used for evil? Or should it just be destroyed?
Yeah, which I mean, that option, of course, is terrible for anyone who collects these things. But it is interesting to think about. It's touched on briefly, but I guess that there also is something that I referenced. There was like a large collection of like Star Wars toys and other collectibles. So the film is primarily, almost exclusively, about the comic book collection. But I was intrigued by the other stuff. How much was there? And it seemed like a lot of it was stuff in boxes. You buy it at a Toys R Us marked down, but then you don't actually open it and you just put it on a shelf or whatever.
Yeah, 1 million collectibles in total, 300,000 comic books, tons of baseball cards. And then the toys took up, I would say, maybe half of a side of a container. and then he had some kind of outside of the containers and other areas in the warehouse. But toys are big, right? So it wasn't like he had 1,000 toys, but I don't want to throw out the wrong number, but it had to be 200 unique
But no,
toys.
the idea of how much it would take up in a shipping container is a pretty good indication, and that was always the stuff that I was the most excited about, because there would be you'd buy Star Wars figures or you'd get the vehicles and there'd be the booklet and you'd be like, well, where's this one? Where's this one that I've never seen in a store? And so as a kid, you're always like, oh, I wish I had that. And then you'd find out, as an adult, like, better example is G.I. Joe had this aircraft carrier called the USS Flag. And even in like the mid 80s, it cost like a couple $100 because it's huge. Wow. It takes up like a whole room. And it's like, well, no one has that. Well, clearly someone had it, but it was just like, so things like that you're like, I just would like to see one. And
sure.
And so like, the Star Wars collectible, the prototype for the Boba Fett figure that the rocket shoots out. It's like, well, I'd love to be in a room. Like they could even have me on the other side of the glass. I just want to see that because I've always known about it. So does that stuff get sort of disseminated through collectors, or is that sort of a separate decision? Is it like, well, we're dealing with the comic book people, maybe at some point we'll get together some collectible people, although it seems like there's some of both in the film.
For sure. Yeah. And they're all, just so people know, they're all in boxes. Every toy he has in boxes, because they used to go to Toys R Us and he would just get one for the kids and one for himself. Or just for himself, as Darren jokes, we'd go to Toys R Us, but not for us. It was toys for him. And maybe they'd go to pizza together. But yeah, I know that the toy guy from Heritage at the time looked through it to start to assess what they had there, because it's even kind of a harder thing to know, like, oh, what do we have and what's great. And, but Darren, I know he's working on the baseball cards too and getting those graded, which is an insane process as well when you have so many. But they are focusing on comic books first. Let's do that while they start to assess the baseball cards and get them graded. But I don't believe they've auctioned or really sold many of the cards yet. And likewise with the toys, I don't think they're there yet. But I know they've had them looked at, and maybe it'll, as they get through the cards and now as the film comes out, maybe they're a little more willing to say, hey, we have this other stuff, everybody. And if you're interested, hopefully there'll be more of the amazing collector people that really love this stuff that are like, hey, do you have XYZ of the toy now that I know about this? And the right people will come out of the woodwork.
Right. And any kind of this speculation, it always factors into the calendar, so like right now we're 3 years away from the 50th anniversary of Star Wars. So somewhere around there might be the time to start trying to move that. And then when it comes to the comic book collectibles, it's like, oh, this character is going to debut in this movie or this TV series. Sure. And so people start to like, oh, we're going to go ahead and get the first appearance of that. And then sometimes the movie doesn't do as well. So maybe that first appearance of Blue Beetle wasn't worth what you thought it would be. But, so there's always a lot of that. It's like, what do people want right now?
And Christian, flooding the market too. They Darren's a savvy businessman. Again, for those that don't know, he was independently wealthy. This is not a lottery film like, oh, now I have money. He already was wealthy. He did not need the money from this. So it's to me, even better of a story where it's more about the unboxing of a past and coming to terms with things. But, there's a flooding of the market that could happen, like with the giant size X-Men. With 10 of those, if you suddenly unleash 10 9.8s, what's that do to all the 9.8s?
Yeah.
And some people have come forward and be like, I'm glad he's been really cognizant of that and not getting them all graded at once and put it on the census, because it hurts a lot of the people that own those.
Yeah. Somebody who bought a 9.8 10 years ago for, I don't even know what it's worth, 50 grand or 250, whatever it is. And then it's like, oh, great. So now that book is worth half of what I paid for it because there's so many out there. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So you could really ruffle a lot of feathers in the collector community if you're not.
That's careful. Right. That's exactly right. So he might know he has them, but hasn't necessarily got them all graded for those reasons too. To be, I think, careful for everybody else and maybe do it in just a slower way. that he wants to be a friend of the community, not just this guy that comes in and like sells it off and he's like, see you later. Like he's part of it.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great transition to being a part of it, and you kind of touched on it. It's a light spoiler because it's revealed in the film a little bit later on, but it's the imprint. So the collection becomes well known, and there is this idea that CGC actually creates one of these labels. And again, my wife would kill me if I turned off my green screen because of the room that I'm in right now. But there's like this label at the top, and mine, because this is a Spider-Man book, it has Spider-Man on it. But talk a little bit about getting this imprint and making the collection known, because of the simple fact that before you even were making this film, people started hearing about this collection, right?
Yeah, they had a what do you call it? The first ever Fantast, or sorry, I'm hearing some funk music. So I don't know if that's from yours or from mine.
But, okay. I don't know if it's from mine, but maybe it's from that tab. I don't know. Yeah.
There we go. I love funk music, so it's tough to talk when I just want to get up and dance.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So difficult. But with that label, first of all, CGC and Heritage have nothing to do with the film. They didn't invest in the film, nothing like that. Some trolls again are like, these are independent investors that help me make films. Okay. And that's why, so I can keep objective and all this stuff. But CGC, knowing Darren's collection and having got to know it and all the things that were in there, Matt Nestle himself seeing the collection, they decided this would be the first provenance to have their own label they could design on their own. So it was the first ever to say, what's this story behind this collection? And so he brings in this guy, Eric Hodgson, who's a comic book artist and creator himself, and says, how can you represent this whole story of my family and my father and what's going on, and create a kind of a montage. As you see, there's Michigan there. There's the scales of justice because his father was valuing the books more than the family. Darren's there trying to pull his brother out of a pit with the candy cane because his younger brother really got swallowed up by his dad in the later years and taking care of him.
There's something that you alluded to. The UFO that you referenced, this idea that he wanted to be shot off into space and have his books taken there with him. So that's right there on the logo. That was, I thought the whole thing was interesting, but when that moment was explained in the film, I was like, oh, wow, there's so much detail in this. It's like a Sgt. Pepper's album cover, or like the old Mad Magazine fold-in the back page, where you're just sort of getting to see a little bit of all this stuff that's here. It's very cool.
Cosmic Cube. His dad loved it. That's what got his dad kind of into it, battling some of his friends in college about what hero would beat what hero in the Cosmic Cube and how powerful it was. And the one thing it'd be hard to know is, like, in the Michigan, there's a missing puzzle piece of the Michigan map of Michigan there in the middle.
Oh yeah, I see that.
And the missing puzzle piece is a symbol for the ASD community, the autism community. Is this kind of puzzle piece, this different piece of the puzzle that represents them. So the artists knew that and brought that in. And then there's some of us on the right that are pictured as well, like the Hatchback Kids in there and things like that. So really cool thing. The artist did an amazing job. You see him in the series and hear a little bit about his kind of underdog story too, coming against adversity to continue.
What's his name? I want to give him a shout out. The artist,
Eric Hodgson. His one of his comics is what is it called? The dinosaur one. It's at the end of the film. I'll think of it later. But Eric Hodgson is he's done some stuff with Rowdy Piper and some of those comic books. And
the advent of technology, he doesn't really have the usage of his hands, but he's still able to create, which is, it's definitely feel good moments like that I think are great. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Yeah, 90% of his hands he can't really use, but he can use the stylus, as he said, and he's thankful for that. He's a sweet dude.
So there are, a couple of different moments where you feel like okay, the story's ending, and Darren feels one way, and then he feels another way, and then he feels a third way. Again, obviously, we want people to watch and enjoy the series as much as I did. And again, it's called Selling Superman. It's available where things are on demand. You reminded me that you can pay for stuff on YouTube, Apple TV, Amazon, Google Play. Basically just go to Selling Superman, the website. Is it just sellingsuperman.com? It is sellingsuperman.com. So you can go there, and that's where you can find it. Yeah, so everything's there. And I definitely encourage people to check it out, because there are definitely some things that happen throughout the course of the 4 episodes that I'm trying to stay away from, because there are those moments that you like, well, what's going to happen with this, so the Fantastic imprint is still out there. The collection is still being sold. He's still working with Harley and the Hatchback Kid, it seems like. So, there's nobody who has to worry about the falling out, so, which again goes back to, Act 4 of Behind the Music. You're always waiting for something like that to happen. So talk a little bit about sort of the future and, really what you hope people take away from seeing this series all about Darren's story in this collection.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, I hope people, of course, watch it, and it's riveting. I've been told that, the editing and the story pacing is quite engaging. The Detroit Free Press just said, it grabs your attention and doesn't let go. It keeps you, and that goes for people that love comics or not. It just keeps them. So as a creator, as an artist, you want to keep people's attention. Number one. Okay, great. I can do that. But anyone can tell, telling a story is one thing, but can we empathize with the character and maybe learn something about ourselves? So that would be the second thing I want people to take away from it is, can they look at their own family conditioning? Can they look at what they value in the world and how they see the world? Because the film gets into that even deeper in episode 4. And then even really how we value ourselves, the lenses by which we perceive ourselves, which is often determined by how we were raised and the society we grew up in. I mean, the more clear you can see that on a person like Darren, which I think it's clear to see, you maybe can start to see it on yourself. And so we thank Darren for his courage for, in essence, helping us see ourselves. And the third thing, if I was to really shoot high, would be that people change the way they see the world in general, that they say, well, I don't even have to look at the world the same way. Maybe the threat that I even look at the world through is again taught to me, is again inherited. And that's why I brought the Übermensch idea into episode 4. The Übermensch mean the Uberman, the Superman from Nietzsche, and how he speaks of when you can drop all society's values and yourself choose your values. Now you're leaping into something really super. And he says it's a very difficult thing to do, but it's a worthy thing. And Nietzsche was plagued by sickness half his life. He was in sickness. So usually half the year he's in deep sickness. So this isn't a guy that just was an aristocrat and had everything. He dealt with challenges and still said, no, we have the power to choose how we see the world. So, those would be the things I want people to contemplate. And of course, just enjoy the ride and get to see some cool books along the way. And maybe at the end they go, I'm going to tell my son I love him. I'm going to tell my daughter I love him. I'm going to spend that extra day with my kid and value the relationships, or maybe at least share the book with them that I wouldn't have thought to, because people are important, basically.
Chris Tuthill has a comment here. Wasn't it Nietzsche that said, when you stare into the comic stares back at you? So I think that might be a paraphrase. But thank you, Chris, checking in from Europe. I know, Chris. So, again, we're talking about sort of the timing, and my hope for your project is that, there's a tremendous documentary now about Christopher Reeve called Super/Man. And what my hope would be is that somebody checks out and gets that and says, people who buy this might also like this, as in your film, because I don't know if you've seen that, but it's incredibly well done. And it's a historical fact. I had no idea that his wife passed away like a year after he did, his second wife. And so there's a lot of focus on his son, who looks and sounds just like him, so it's a wonderful film. And, again, that's kind of the earliest idea of a superhero for me, is Christopher Reeve as Superman. Now, I was in preschool and I loved the Adam West Batman series. I'd watch it every day when I come home from preschool. But there was like Superman was just up there on the big screen, and I loved Superman so much that I don't even think I realized how bad Superman 4 was until I was much older. But whew, that's a tough one. It's really really a
Even
tough one.
Superman 3 wasn't all that
It's
good.
not great. At least it had Richard Pryor in it, though.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah,
That is
I
true.
know.
Superman
It's
2.
it's
Superman.
really like there have been 2 good Superman movies ever. Some people might say.
Right. I mean, Superman 2, that's why I did put it early in the series, is because I love that one. And I almost had Ursa, I think her name is
Yeah.
Sarah is the actress's name, and because my friend is neighbors with her, and we were trying so hard to arrange times when she was around to interview her, but I was in touch with her through this whole project. I thought, ooh, and I was really to be honest, I was working on Zod, himself.
Terrence Stamp. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
Terrence.
if you could get Terrence. I mean, look, even if you have to do like a mini-sode in the future, if you ever get the chance to talk to Terrence Stamp, it's worth it.
Maybe after it comes out, right? It'll open
Yeah.
his eyes or heart to this. But the reason was because I knew Terrence took a huge chunk of his life and went to India, and when he came back from that, because he was a leading man type guy, goes to India and faces a lot of things, faces his own shadows, and comes back. And I might be paraphrasing a little bit, but comes back and is a little more apt to take on roles that he's not the traditional hero. And that's when he takes on the villain role in Superman, is after he's been to India and kind of had a rebirth, and comes back and redefines himself in the film world and goes on to have an amazing career. And his autobiography is fantastic. And he talks a lot about the yogic path, Nietzsche, right? What we're talking about. To me, that's the yogic path of like, who am I and what do I value and what's important? So I really wanted Terrence in, not only to have Terrence, but like to have the villain start talking about these cool things about the underbelly of conditioning and becoming oneself. Like, oh, how perfect would that be to say it for me? I don't have to. Instead, I brought in Nietzsche and a philosopher because I couldn't get Terrence. But you're the first person I've told that to.
Oh no, but I love that, and I mean Terrence Stamp is obviously tremendous, and he was. He was definitely, I produced a radio show for a long time with Dennis Miller, the comedian, and we would get a lot of these things where, just actors are doing like radio tours, and you had like 10 minutes with him, and it was like, oh my God, it's like, we're talking to Zod, and like I had to calm down a little bit because, I'm the one who answers the phone. So I'm like, okay, yeah, just hang on a minute, General Zod. And, interesting sort of what you were talking about, because, sort of his spending time in India and all that, it reminded me that I was reading up on you, and this is the only thing of your work that I've seen, but I was intrigued by reading about a docuseries you did about the Himalayas, The Road to Dharma. And so I feel like that the subject matter you're talking about in terms of, Terrence Stamp's sort of decision, it's like you would probably connect to him sort of on that. Absolutely. I guess spiritual with like the lowercase s, sort of the spiritual journey of that. So
absolutely. Absolutely. Because India was huge for me for waking up. I mean, I was always into meditation since I was 18, but you go to India and you're faced with a lot of things, especially if you take a pilgrimage, right? And I believe that in some ways I put Darren through a pilgrimage. I mean, he chose to by going into the comic books, but then to make a film on it really pushed him to expose himself and took him through the ringers. Again, it's not a spoiler to know that he was having a lot of doubts about making the film throughout the film. And we talk about that in the press and the trolls. And it was really, really irking him and bringing up a lot of shadows quicker. So we put Darren really through a pilgrimage. And I, again, thank him for that. He's very courageous to take it faster than he would have had to. I love pilgrimage. That's for sure where Terrence and I would have, I think hit it off, just talking about going through India and what comes up for you and what you get to see. It's a different way of life. It's a different culture. People see the world differently. I mean, deeply, especially when you're surrounded by 2,000 years of heritage, something happens to you when you're going to these temples and things that have just been there forever. That's where the Buddha was hanging out talking. Something happens. So I think Terrence and I would have geeked out, maybe still will geek out about that, about gurus and such. Yeah. Maybe if I could get one of the Beatles, Paul McCartney, I would geek out with him on that too.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely things that there are very insightful people have sort of done sort of that, and it's sort of you're talking about there's other ways that the story of musicians and artists change. There's sort of
Mhm.
that moment when the Beatles start, they go to visit the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and all of a sudden it's like, I mean, they're always great, the Beatles, but they see the world in a different way. And then you realize, oh yeah, no one saw the world the way those four guys did, and that was sort of the beginning of it. So
their music,
it's
changed, and that's Rishikesh, the birthplace of yoga. That's where I ended up going and
okay.
keep going, and it's like my second home. My guru lives there, and so yeah, it's the same place. And Road to Dharma starts there, just to bring it back to that series.
Oh,
Our
interesting.
motorcycle, we start at Rishikesh, where that's again where the birthplace of yoga, where the Beatles were at. And then the monsoon rains had gone longer, and we're going to these sacred Himalayan sites, but it's just dangerous as all can be. I mean, at nighttime with insane, insane roads. Number one, you don't know what's under the water. There's probably, nothing is good in India when it comes to roads. It's just craziness.
Right.
So it's really scary. You're facing death, but you're also being taken to the heights where you can, if you want it, you have access to some really beautiful wisdom about freedom. That whole show is about internal freedom, but kind of like Superman, I like to keep it entertaining. So you throw it on motorcycles with some life and death situations and 12 characters that are all different kind of people. Now you have something that, you'll keep our attention.
Yeah.
And
Right. Yeah,
while
definitely.
while we slip in these jewels of wisdom, that's to me the sweet spot. If we can do both things at the same time.
Yeah, and Ken Egan, of course, references George Harrison, who I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
was the most immediately impacted. Like all of a sudden, George
yep,
started having sort of those sitar songs included on each Beatles album, and
yeah.
his solo work and all of that, and knowing people who have known him a little bit, it seems like he was an amazing guy. I guess if you're any one of the Beatles, you are in very elite company. Well, Adam, thank you so much for taking so much time. And I really
My pleasure.
enjoyed the film. I want people to enjoy it. So that's why there's not a lot of questions like, yeah, but what about when this happened? Because I want
Hmm.
people to see that unfold. And there are
Yes.
definitely a few of those moments where I'm like, I was talking about like, okay, I'll watch this over a few days. I was like, oh, I got to stay up and watch the next one now because of something that happens. And I want to know. And that's exactly the way you design it. So
Yeah.
sellingsuperman.com, that's really where they go to get everything, right? They'll get all the information there, the social media, where they can
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
to actually watch the show,
Yeah.
correct?
Trailers there, links out to Apple and Amazon. There's even a special edition where there's bonus features and a special Q&A that Ash Crossan did for us. She was on E and did a lot of Comic Cons. So there's a special edition there that costs a little bit more than what you get on Apple and iTunes and all that. But if you want to see those kind of cool behind the scenes moments, then go for that one because you'll enjoy that.
Yeah, there's always the special stuff. And again, Cam Egan, terrific show. Can't wait to watch the movie. And Yoda World considers us both buddies. So,
All right,
and
I'm with you,
you
man.
just met Yoda World today. Well, thanks again so much, Adam, and really appreciate your time there. I want to let everybody know that our next episode here on Geekscape, our next episode will be Monday, the 25th, where myself, Eric, David Brody, Nate Miller, and our guest Jeff Winstead, we're going to celebrate our 3 favorite Marvel stories. So you'll be able to find that Monday, and I believe at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. So you'll find that show. And for our Blackcast audience, we're going to be diving into Gladiator 2, and we'll do that in the near future. But that's all the time we have for now. As the great Stan Lee would say, Excelsior! And we'll see you next time.